This is the e-learning podcast, episode number 54.
OpenStax is an organization based at Rice University, and it was founded on and continues to do its best to provide course materials and help instructors teach and students learn by providing open and free textbooks and related course materials. And in my role there, I work mostly with faculty, some with students and other instructional staff at the schools to make sure that our materials are doing the job and they're getting the information across and that there's no barriers to learning. That's our real goal, is to lower as many barriers to learning as possible.
Welcome to the e-learning podcast. My name's Laddick, and I'm your host from lmspulse.com. Today's episode is part one of a three-part series on open educational resources, or OER, created in collaboration with OpenStax and Rice University in Houston. Anthony Palmiotto is the Editorial Director of OpenStax, one of the most influential supporters of the OER movement. OpenStax gives you a comprehensive and top-notch library of peer-reviewed textbooks and other curricular resources, all completely free for teachers and students. With initiatives like OpenStax, OER has saved students millions of dollars by offering quality content that's continuously updated and improved. In this open and educational conversation, Anthony and I talk about what exactly is OpenStax, its origins at Rice University, and what it's like to be at the forefront of the OER revolution. We also talk about why, regardless of licensing issues, the goals of OpenStax and OER revolve around creating the best publishing platform out there for learners, teachers, and creators. We also talk about why OER is such an important ingredient in discussions about equity and education. Not only does OER eliminate the barrier of cost for underserved groups, but how an institution like OpenStax can also promote diversity by actively working to fix biases and one-sided or Eurocentric perspectives in the resources that they provide. Finally, we talk about the challenges OER currently faces to gain wider appeal and what Anthony and OpenStax are doing to help teachers bring OER into their lessons. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The e-learning podcast is sponsored by the e-learning Success Summit. Learn from more than 40 experts how to teach, work, and learn online without being overwhelmed. Get your free ticket to the summit at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And lmspulse.com, your best source for news, information, and resources for e-learning professionals for more than 10 years. Get our free roundup of the week's top news at lmspulse.com.
Hello, Anthony. Welcome to the e-learning podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Anthony, where do we find you sitting today?
I am in my home just outside New York City in Suffern, New York.
Suffern. So now for those of us, I'm lucky to have lived up there, but outside New York City, so that's north. Are you like what we would call a bridge and tunnel person, or are you further away than that?
I have been a bridge and tunnel person. So anything above 34th Street is technically upstate, but in our arena, we're 20 miles, 25 miles outside of New York, so we can make it pretty fast.
Nice. All right, cool. Very cool. And, one of the things, so I've already teed you up in the introduction here, we with your title and kind of what we talked about and those kinds of things but tell us in your own words, like who are you? What do you do? Like what's OpenStax, and kind of give us the 30 seconds on that.
Sure. OpenStax is an organization based at Rice University, and it was founded on and continues to do its best to provide course materials and help instructors teach and students learn by providing open and free textbooks and related course materials. And in my role there, I work mostly with faculty, some with students and other instructional staff at the schools to make sure that our materials are doing the job and they're getting the information across and that there's no barriers to learning. That's our real goal, is to lower as many barriers to learning as possible.
Awesome. And for those people, well, I want to dive into that more, but the one last thing in kind of an introduction here, I've been using the podcast as something of a time capsule around sort of what's happening with COVID, right? And so we've seen the ups and the downs and the lefts and the rights. We're recording this, at the top of August here in 2021. As you sit in you said Saffron, New York, is that what it was? Okay. What's the COVID situation like? What do things look like? I mean, are people expecting to return to school? Are businesses open? Is the Delta, kicking everybody's butt? What's going on?
Thanks so much for asking. It looks like we're sort of right on the edge. There was all this, hope and energy around full return to school, no masks and everything. Our community is very well vaccinated. I believe, I don't know the exact numbers, but things are going pretty well. Of course, the Delta variant and other conditions are adding some question and trepidation into that. As of now, from what I understand, where we are going back. What exactly that's going to look like and the flexibility that I think people are going to have is a little bit up in the air. It's sort of what 6 weeks away is when school starts from about now. We start in the middle of September. So there's a little time maybe to kick Delta's butt a little bit and come back from full force.
Sure. Well, I'll let you know how it goes. Everybody who listens to this podcast knows I've got 3 kids. They're all sort of middle school, primary school age. And, we're down here in Mexico. I'm in Mexico City. We're starting in 4 days. So we're very, very, very excited that our school is announced in person. And so the trepidation and just sort of the unknowns and the eggshells that everybody's walking on right now are intense. But after 14 months of completely online, we are like, yes.
I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, you're working education. I'm working education. Seeing that firsthand with my family. My wife's a teacher, my son goes to school, but also seeing all these students in schools and instructors doing their best over all this time, and knowing that, hey, I could have done better, or we at OpenStax could have done better. Everybody's trying so hard, so I hope it all comes through to be what everybody wants.
Very cool. All right. Nice. So OpenStax, you're at Rice University. One thing that you didn't mention, how long have you been around? Is this a couple of years? Is this decades old? How long has this been going on?
Sure. So OpenStax started in a different form that was called Connections by our founder, Rich, who's a professor at Rice. And he wanted to do a few things, including write and distribute a textbook, but he didn't want to go through the commercial publishing process. So being an electrical engineering professor and having some skills in that area, he and his students and colleagues developed a platform with which faculty could develop and post and publish and share and edit textbooks and other course content. That was 1999, turn of the century. So 10 years later, in about 2011, the idea was, okay, we have that platform, let's take it further. And instead of waiting for everybody to give us content, which many people did, which was great, let's develop material of our own that aligns to the typical courses and the scope and sequence and the course outcomes of major introductory college courses, and provide those high quality textbooks to students and faculty at no charge openly, and maintain that same idea. It is open education resources. It's all published, except for a couple of the textbooks are published under a CC BY Creative Commons attributions license. Mm-hmm. The exceptions just have a couple of other abbreviations to that acronym, but everything is openly licensed. And that was 2011. And I think we published our first OpenStax book formally in 2012. So we're coming on 10 years. And in that time, we've been really fortunate to support millions of students. We're up to about 5 million students per year. That number will probably go up a big number once we get the information from the fall, courses and enrollments. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We're mostly serving college students and upper level high school students, but the material is used and usable in any format, in any course that an instructor wants to use it in, or even just a learner outside of a course.
Wow.
So so that's about how long it's been, and the impact we've had so far. The impact is really reliant on the faculty that were willing to sort of take a leap and do something a little different from the normal way they had been teaching and using course materials.
Give me that before you gave me this great tee up to what we were really going to talk about, which is like sort of the cultural relevance and sort of the editing process that you're putting into more equitability and more equality within the textbooks themselves. But give me that juxtaposition real quick, like in higher ed, okay, a professor comes out. I know because I do this, I teach at American University. Like you get, hey, we need to know what your book requirements are and stuff for the library. Tell us what titles and blah, blah, blah. And then obviously students have to come and buy those books for your course or whatever. How does that differ from the OpenStax solution? Is it still like they name them on the syllabus and then students just don't have to pay, or how's that work?
Absolutely. So our goal, especially at that early stage with OpenStax, was to just make it as seamless and as typical as possible. So faculty, the difficult thing with college textbook spending and other course material spending, subscriptions and the like, is that faculty make the decisions. And even though so many of those faculty are very sensitive to the price, they're often not paying for it. The students are. So that creates a barrier if the students can't pay for their textbooks or have difficulty or need to make difficult choices in that regard, which introduces inequities. So what we did is we post a textbook that is on a website. It's available at a link that an instructor can post on their website or their syllabus or in their LMS. It's also available in a PDF that can be downloaded. It can be downloaded as many times as students want to as many devices as they want. It's meant to be accessible so that students can look at different phone, different screen, tablet, whatever device they're using. And we actually also have print. The print does incur a cost, but for those instructors and students that need print, they can order through their bookstore just like a typical textbook. So the process of adopting an OpenStax textbook is, we feel, a little bit easier than most commercial textbooks, but it's also very similar. So there's not a lot of change that needs to happen in that regard.
Okay, cool. So what we really, a part of what we want to do, and there's going to be a couple of your colleagues here on the podcast as well, which I'm really excited about, because we wanted to do this sort of series on equitable education, right? And so the process that we wanted to talk about today was how, you have these professors and people, experts, whatever, who are producing this material for you. You have this huge library now, but you're serving, as you said, millions of students from, I'm assuming, lots in North America, but it's a global audience. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that you've noticed, and I'd love to hear, like, at what point did this become a question? You said, hey, look, we need to maybe think about some of the cultural relevance or some of the diversity issues in the textbooks themselves. So kind of take me through the history of that conversation and that process.
Absolutely. So our textbooks are written by faculty and are reviewed extensively by faculty from different schools, different geographies. Those institutions, those colleges are representing different populations. We try to keep it as diverse as possible. And I would say that in the beginning of OpenStax, in that 2012, 2013, 2014 timeline, we were just getting started, and we thought, perhaps mistakenly, that representation would be, I don't want to say good enough, but would be adequate in some ways to reflect the needs and the experiences of those students from diverse backgrounds. And that was true to an extent. And we would always include review questions and other items around balance and whether the material does seem inclusive and so on. And it did its job, I think, early on. But what we're really focused on now, and have been for several years, is going a little more deeply and more actively into bringing in direct authors and reviewers who are representing those populations directly, who are different races and ethnicities, and so on, so that we can directly reflect the lived experience of those students, and that those instructors can too. And I'd say one other thing that was really important for us was, beyond just the authorship, before we put anything down in a textbook, before we say anything, quote unquote, it's really important that we listen. So what we tried to do very early was talk to faculty representing those groups, and think about them sort of at the intersection of the discipline expertise, physics, economics, math, and also interest in diversity and inclusion, and expertise in diversity and inclusion. So some of the first people that we started to involve were members of diversity boards and equity organizations within the academic disciplines. So the American Physical Society's, diversity board, the Chemistry Society's diversity board, math, economics, and so on. And those provided us some really interesting insights about both the ways we could approach this, but also the challenges within the discipline, because it manifests itself differently, I think, in different arenas, the opportunities to be inclusive.
Give me some specific examples right there. Like, how would a diversity board in physics differ or have a different perspective on now,
right.
Any humanities or whatever, that kind of thing.
Exactly. I think in certain courses, nothing is easy here, and there's no oh, this discipline is easier than another. But the opportunities to provide culturally inclusive content in an English course they abound, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many creators, there's so many authors, there's so many people that are beyond authors, commentators, and people teaching those courses and teaching courses with a culturally responsive lens, right? The whole course is oriented around that. Algebra-based or calculus-based introductory physics doesn't have those same opportunities. There are plenty of opportunities in terms of the scientists that you bring up, the examples that you use, the situations, that you're trying to solve. It doesn't have to be an elevator example. It could be somebody building a bridge to a village, or a pipe to bring water somewhere, or something like that. You could bring that up, but let's be clear, it doesn't present itself in the same way that a sociology course, an English course, a history course does.
Right.
And working with those faculty to find those opportunities, and put them forth in an interesting way. I'll give you just one other example. In a course like a chemistry, the other item is there is a cognitive load factor, for example. I mean, if you're going to tell the story about how Alice Ball, for example, created a cure for leprosy, there's a lot of material background that you have to include there to tell that story well. It's tokenism if you just mention, oh, and by the way, this young woman did this and it was great. There's a lot you have to tell there, and that's good to tell. And the hard part is balancing that with, okay, what are the students going to get out of that? How are we connecting that directly to the concepts, but also taking those opportunities, cycling back around to what assessments can we ask about that? What experimentation can we set up, or situations, asking students opinion-based questions that they could found in evidence based on their knowledge of chemistry. So there's a lot of opportunities, but it's hard to draw out. And I think it's a lot of effort that a lot of faculty have been working on very hard to make it happen.
How does it play out across different level of textbook in terms of, you said that this is really, probably there's a bulk of higher ed, so college-based textbooks. Do you go down? You said it was also, I believe, like high school level as well. You don't go down into K-12, correct? Or
we don't. Our textbooks are generally intended for the introductory college courses.
Right. So these could be also like AP courses and stuff in high school.
Yes. And yeah, exactly. Now, in both sort of on-level high school courses and dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment, and AP courses, there's crossover. And also, in a beneficial way, the fact that the textbooks are free and open both of those are important. The free factor is important because even if a textbook isn't perfect for a freshman level, first year level course at a high school, if it's a textbook that you don't have to pay for, maybe an instructor will take that and leverage it the way that they need to. And secondarily, but as importantly, the fact that it's open, it can be edited, it can be picked apart, it could be, you can only use pieces of it if needed, so that the resources can be used in that context as well. And that allows us to present that. But in terms of the way that this all reveals itself on the level is a really critical aspect, because sometimes the most current research, the things where you do, actually, can I just start this piece over here? Just one sec.
Yeah, sure. Of course. Okay. So we're talking about, let's see, how do you want, like what?
I was just going to go into the level thing.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, go ahead. We'll just cut it right here, and then I'll seam them together somehow.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pause. One of the challenges that we have in bringing in more diverse scientists and contributors to the field is that the earliest pioneers, the names we hear every day in any discipline, are usually white men. And one other thing that these boards and these faculty from the different groups have told us is we don't want to erase that. It's important to understand Faraday's contributions, that the equations are named after him, right? Mm-hmm. We can't erase that, and we shouldn't. But one of the challenges we have is that a way to bring in more diverse contributors is to talk about people that are building on his research now. people that are more representative. Sometimes the challenge is those folks are doing it at a very high level. The research is very intensive, and there's of course ways to explain everything in different terms, but these are introductory textbooks. They're not, graduate level monographs.
So you're saying like Tyson DeGrassi going into like quantum physics about, Saturn, that could present a problem for physics 101.
It could sometimes do that. And how much, right? And do instructors feel like, okay, this is a bit of a tangent? What we like, again, we're talking a lot about science here. Again, we cover a lot of disciplines, and in other areas, it's the opportunities just abound. But in some of the challenging areas, in astronomy, for example, you brought up, I see a lot of examples of culturally responsive teaching that talk about a question such as, tell me about the ethnocentrism and the colonialism that is represented by the names of the constellations. And that's an outstanding activity to sort of embed with students, right? I mean, think about how they're thinking about it, and hopefully beyond what they're thinking just about the constellations, the goal there is, I think, you start to have them thinking with that lens. Okay, what else not only in astronomy, what else in my life is representing that? But again, when you start talking about neutron star or the cosmological constant, that opportunity might not present itself as easily. So again, just because it's hard doesn't mean we don't do it, but sometimes things have different levels of access and inclusion depending on where you are in the course and depending on what course you're in.
So take me to where, like, what would you say as the editorial director here? What would you say your biggest challenge is right now beyond sort of, I mean, we've been talking about sort of the content in these places. Is it just the volume of necessary edits that are going on across this library that you have, the volumes that you have? Is it the demand from either, they demand from students for this material and they're like, look, we want it now? Or is it, pushback from professors? Like, where are you finding your maybe your 2 or 3 biggest challenges in this evolution that's happening? I'm assuming that's what we would call it, an evolution, right?
Yeah, I think it's an evolution. And it's one that has to happen. I think the biggest challenge is sort of I'm going to use the word intersection again. At the same time as we're trying to build these bridges by being more inclusive and being very overt about, being progressive in terms of how we include culturally responsive, equitable content and so on, there's also a level of prevention. Of where are we perpetuating a stereotype? By the place of some people and the way they're described in the context, and also the terminology we use, terminology that might be changing, and so on. I think that balance is difficult, and we have to do both at once. I think we all do, right? We're all becoming more knowledgeable about our implicit bias, about microaggressions. We're also considering what facts of a course. I'll give you a quick example. We have a sociology textbook, and one of the students found that a lot of the representation of Black people in the book was negative. Not necessarily that Black people were doing negative things, but that it was talking about the inequities that face them, that they face. And we really face this issue, and taking that further, talking about it with the faculty who are authoring the textbook and using the textbook. A lot of them acknowledge that, hey, the textbook is just a part of the course. And I believe that. I'm an editorial director of a textbook group company, and the textbook should only be, 15, 20, 25% of a course, right? There's so much more that happens. Lecture and interaction and group work and online discussion, of course, especially over the past year, and students learning on their own, students learning from each other, right? So how do you swing an entire course to be more aware of that portrayal and that? And I think the hard part often is balancing sort of a confrontation of our negative history, of things that have impacted people in a bad way, but also celebrating the people who have worked through those challenges and the good in how things have changed, revealing that evolution. And we're not, as a country, as a world, we're not done yet, but we have come a certain way. And how do we sort of balance that without giving short shrift to either. That's one of the challenges we really have. I think it's one that we're going to keep having. But the more inclusive we can be in the people that we're talking to and working with, involving students, involving faculty, involving advocacy groups and others, and then the more of a method we put into it. If every chapter gets reviewed with a lens and direct questions about the people that are portrayed, are stereotypes being perpetuated, the images that are used, of course, the example fictional names that are used, all of that can combine. If we review every chapter, if we review every textbook along those lines, well, I think we'll do better.
And would that be just, again, you said you want to put it into a methodology or a process. So, either, for existing and for new material that comes in, it's like, all right, first let's, is it like, hey, let's check the facts, like, hey, do the equations actually work? Was that point in history really a real thing? And then you go to a next layer, or is that done all in one time? Do you give that to one person and say, hey, look, here are the 5 criteria, or does it pass from department to department? How does that work?
That's a great question. We have 2 separate review processes. They do cross over in some arenas. So we do have faculty talking about the facts, the accuracy, the currency, and the alignment with the course. Not only is this right, but is this what you teach? Because again, within any course, there's level issues and so on. And then and in those review questionnaires, we will ask about, did you see anything? Do you see an opportunity to include someone? How do you teach this course relative to being inclusive, and so on? We ask those questions, but those questions are a subset. We have another review that goes on either right after or in parallel, depending on the project, that is dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion, using a rubric, if you will, or a framework that we developed with a lot of input from faculty and experts in inclusive design. And they're looking at those issues predominantly. Of course, if they see anything factually or alignment-wise or currency, they'll also mention it. But for the most part, they're focused on that DEI aspect. So those go on, and a lot of times they're providing us with new ideas, with things we didn't think of, because we have to ask that question. What are we not asking? What are we not thinking of? What happens in the course or in the discipline that might be in the textbook, but maybe shouldn't be, or the opposite? And they're also helping us with another aspect of, another example, if it's okay.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
If we're teaching, something like American government. American government is another one of these courses where opportunities abound to be more inclusive and reflect lived experiences of all types of people. But, there are some aspects of how much does it an instructor or a course designer or a department or a student wants every moment of every course to be confronting those challenges.
Right.
When you do the Fourth Amendment, right? If you're going through the Bill of Rights and do the Fourth Amendment, there's a lot of bad aspects that you could bring in, legal search and seizure, no knock warrants, right? Those are the examples that could be brought in.
Sure.
And that's important to do. When you get to the Fifth Amendment, I hate to make it sound like a catalog, but the question is, okay, do you confront the same types of issues, civil
Right.
forfeiture, or do you focus on something else like eminent domain? And I think by our challenge is to sort of provide both opportunities, right? So, and give the instructor the touch point where they can take it where they want to go. But I think that idea, just like we scaffold assessment and difficulty and level of complexity, there is an element of scaffolding, or at least providing choice for how culturally responsive content is added and how it's included, because it is often added. We're often not replacing. This isn't just OpenStax, this is everybody. We're adding new considerations, but the class is still just as long. They still have an hour for lecture. It's all about.
Well, yeah, it sounds like, I think you mentioned this earlier in a great way. It's at the end of the day, it would be really easy to place the responsibility of DEI on one thing, right? And so to say, hey, look, the textbook is going to be inclusive, and therefore I'm just going to kind of teach my course, or the conversation in the room is going to, we're going to any one point, right? Like it's a holistic effort at the end of the day, and so the professor or the teacher or the whatever needs to be a guide in that. And so, right. So the text they're choosing, as well as the examples, as well as how they're guiding the conversation, as well as the assignments, and then, the feedback they give, all of that ends up becoming the universe, right? That
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and one of the things I think a lot about as I talk to faculty about this is that, to that point, nobody's starting from zero. Everybody has either, their own experience, or, I mean, fortunately, we've been talking about equity and inclusiveness and the things we do wrong and the things we do right and the things we can do better for a while now. I think it's amped up certainly in the past couple of years, but most faculty have, attended workshops, attended trainings on being more inclusive, on avoiding microaggressions, on getting over implicit bias and understanding privilege. They've also, I mean, they're experts in these fields, right? They've read the papers, they've written the papers, on these things. So they're the drivers, and the students are the drivers, and we're just providing a support. And to the point about, it's about, I think very often, one thing to recognize also with textbooks, I'm not being humble here, but many instructors don't need the textbook to teach. They're not reading out of the textbook every day as they're teaching their course, right? It's a support that they might reference, but it's for students.
Right.
And the more intertwined those can be, maybe the better the usage is, but there's all different ways to teach a course, right? Flip learning and using formative assessment and independent study and everything. And that's before COVID-19 put everybody in remote learning, so that was before. And then of course we had the past year. But I think one of the important things that you mentioned is get that inclusive content, get those new ideas into the assessments, into the PowerPoints, that we as a publisher provide. And then so that, because if we mention someone or something or some event or some circumstance in the textbook, but the instructor doesn't see it, they might not ask about it, right? And even if they know the issue, it might not come to mind, and so on. And we really have, it's sort of this push-pull where we're providing resources, even though the instructors know the material, they draw on, they touch on, they launch from sometimes what's in the textbooks and in the ancillary materials. And I also think by doing that, again, OpenStax, any courseware provider, any textbook publisher doesn't exist in a vacuum. We have competitors, right? And that's the other aspect of, and it's not just us, right? If a commercial publisher adds something to a textbook, adds a new chapter that covers something that nobody else did before, well, then people are going to start teaching that, and it's going to make it into the course. Same thing with us. If we add something, maybe it starts to influence what people teach in that course, and it becomes a new learning outcome, a new assessment, a new question on a standardized test. That's the sort of thing that we can all do because, as I said earlier on, instructors, faculty, schools, and others are taking its material and then doing with it, and that's we just want to let them launch from there.
Couple more questions for you to round this out. Has there been, over the last, let's say, okay, in COVID maybe, but then also before that, as you've been doing this, has there been like an aha moment, or like, this is, one of those moments where you're like, oh yeah, this is why we're doing this. This is like, that you could share with us, just one of those, I know that you mentioned the student before who said these are all negative things, but one of those like successes where you're just like, wow, this is the reason.
I think that example I gave about sociology with the student pointing something out was important. I think we've seen others with the way that I think one of the interesting things is the way mental health comes up in textbooks, and the way that instructors and students have become more sensitive to it. That's, when anyone, especially a faculty with a master's degree or a PhD, comes to us and says, hey, I learned something new from your material that I didn't understand before, or that I didn't think of before. That's just a great, and we've had a few of those definitely on the positive side. And I think the other thing, just in general, overall equity, we're not, it's the content is the content. We're not teaching content, we're teaching the students. And the fact that they can have an open book, they can have a free textbook, and they don't have to make that choice between a textbook and food, between a textbook and medicine, or something for their kid, or something for themselves. Or they can purchase the other textbook or the support they need. That's equity in and of itself. And we know that faculty at so many schools are taking these great efforts with developing their own food pantries and lending libraries and other things. And many are going even beyond that, taking students in, working out their transportation issues, and being, of course, more flexible in their teaching practices, their grading practices, their attendance practices, especially over the past year. But open textbooks and the people that use them, they provide a lot of inclusiveness and equity just from using them.
Final question I have for you, Anthony, and this, again, I feel like this is a conversation as so usual. We could probably continue talking about this for the next 2 hours, but what are you most excited about over, you're looking at the new school year here, but it could be 6 months from now, a year from now. Are you putting this in new technology? Is there a new line of books coming out, or like, what are you most jazzed about that you can see in the future, but it's not quite here that you want to tell people about?
I think the more we are putting out more books, and I think one of the important things is that, like you alluded to before, we have an existing library of over 40 books that we're revising over time. But then we do have new books. We have in the next year, we'll have about 10 brand new textbooks that are publishing. Mm-hmm. And those textbooks were developed from scratch with this more in mind and this methodology really in place. And the methodology itself, the people involved are always changing. We're always getting more information, more considerations, but that would be something new. And hopefully we can see and we can learn, and maybe it's through formal research, maybe it's through anecdotal research, maybe it's through usage patterns, how it works, how it does better. And then most especially, like I've kept saying, what instructors do with it. What the benefit of the other thing is that open OER is not just a series of resources on a website or a series of textbooks at OpenStax. It's a community. Mm-hmm. And material that builds on what we've provided, material where people, oh, that's great, that's a great founding textbook for this great new unit that I've developed. That's the thing that we really are excited about. Getting those new users, getting those new students, and seeing what they have to say and what they have to offer.
Fantastic. Anthony, I'm going to see if I can do it. Palmiotto, right?
Perfect.
Excellent.
Great.
Anthony Palmiotto, you are the editorial director at an organization called OpenStax. You provide open and free resources for higher education and, I guess, somewhat, in the secondary market as well, the secondary education world. But, this has been a really, really interesting conversation about bringing more equity into text. It's excellent. Thank you so much for your time. And I really look forward to circling back with you and your colleagues sometime in the near future.
Thank you very much for having me. So appreciate it.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the e-learning podcast. If you like what you heard, please do me the favor of following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whichever social media you prefer. Also, if you're interested in diving deeper on e-learning, I encourage you to get your free ticket to the e-learning Success Summit, where there are more than 70 hours of presentations on best practices. Just go to elearningsuccesssummit.com. And then finally, for the latest news, information, and resources about e-learning, come subscribe to our newsletter at lmspulse.com. Thanks.